It's October 24th, 1929. Winston Churchill is in New York City. He's not prime minister yet, just a British politician visiting the Savoy Plaza Hotel. He looks out the window and sees something that will haunt him for the rest of his life. A crowd is gathering 15 stories below. They are screaming. Churchill watches as a man climbs onto the ledge of a window and jumps. His body smashes onto the pavement. Churchill later wrote that this man had been ruined by the stock market. He had lost everything, so he chose the quickest way out. And Churchill wasn't the only one telling this story. The newspapers the next day ran with headlines that screamed of chaos. Pedestrians ducking bodies on Wall Street. Ruined bankers raining from the sky. It is the defining image of the Great Crash. The wealthy elite, stripped of their fortunes, leaping from skyscrapers in a final act of despair. It's a powerful image. It's dramatic. It's poetic justice. There is just one problem. It's a lie. That man Churchill saw? He didn't jump because he lost money. He jumped before the market even crashed. He was a German chemist named Dr. Otto Methaus, and his suicide was likely due to a messy divorce, not a margin call. But the story stuck. We want to believe it. We want to believe that when the money vanished, the people who worshipped it vanished too. The truth about 1929 is much scarier than bodies falling from the sky. The truth isn't about dying instantly. It's about surviving and wishing you hadn't. It's about how an entire country, from the Rockefeller to the janitor, convinced themselves that they had discovered a magical money machine that would never break. And then, in the span of a few hours, they watched the machine eat them alive. This is the story of the day Wall Street didn't just jump. It's the day it died. 2:30, 0700. The setup, the champagne haze. To understand the crash, you have to understand the party. And make no mistake, the 1920s were the biggest party in American history. Imagine the vibe. World War I is over. The Spanish flu is gone. Suddenly, everyone has electricity. Everyone wants a radio. Everyone is buying a Ford Model T. The air smells like gasoline and cheap perfume. Jazz is playing on every corner. For the first time in history, Americans aren't just saving money under a mattress. They are spending it. And they are investing it. Before the 20s, the stock market was a rich man's country club. If you were a regular Gaia plumber, a teacher, a farmer, you didn't own stocks. You bought Liberty bonds to support the war, but that was it. But then, Charles Mitchell changed everything. Mitchell was the head of National City Bank. He had a brilliant, dangerous idea. Why are we only selling stocks to the rich? There aren't enough of them. Let's sell to everybody. He opened brokerage offices all over the country. He treated stocks like vacuum cleaners or washing machines. He advertised them. He told the average American, "You are missing out. Your neighbor is getting rich. Why aren't you?" And it worked. It worked too well. By 1929, the market wasn't just reflecting the economy. It was completely detached from reality. Stocks like RCA, Radio Corporation of America, surged from $85 to over $500 in a single year. It didn't pay dividends. It didn't matter. The price only went up. But here is the real poison. It wasn't that people were buying stocks. It was how they were buying them. It's called buying on margin. Let me explain this simply because this is the mechanic that destroyed the world. Imagine you have $100 in your pocket. You go to a broker. You want to buy $100 worth of stock. The broker looks at you and says, "Hey, why buy $100 worth? Give me your $100 as a deposit, and I'll lend you $900 more. Now you can buy $1,000 worth of stock." Think about that. You only own 10% of the asset. The rest is debt. If the stock goes up 10%, congratulations. You just doubled your money. You made a 100% profit on your initial $100. It felt like magic. It felt like free money. Waitresses were trading tips for stock tips. Shoeshine boys were analyzing ticker tape. There's a famous story, probably apocryphal, but accurate in spirit, where Joe Kennedy, the father of JFK, was getting his shoes shined. The boy polishing his shoes looked up and said, "Mr. Kennedy, buy Hindenburg stock. It's going to the moon." Kennedy walked away and sold everything. He reasoned that when the shoeshine boy is giving stock tips, the market is officially insane. But most people weren't Joe Kennedy. They were drunk on optimism. They believed in a new era. Yale economist Irving Fisher, a rock star academic of his time, famously proclaimed just days before the crash, "Stock prices have reached what looks like a permanently high plateau." He wasn't lying. He truly believed it. They all did. They thought they had defeated the business cycle, but underneath the floorboards, the foundation was rotting. Steel production was down. Car sales were slowing. Construction was halting. The real economy was already in recession. But the stock market? It kept climbing. It was a zombie market, dead but still walking, fueled by borrowed money and blind faith. And the bill was about to come due. September 1929. The summer heat is fading, and a chill starts to creep into the air. And I'm not just talking about the weather. The market hits its all-time high on September 3rd. The Dow Jones stands at 381.117. It won't see that number again for 25 years. Roger Babson, a statistician who had been warning about a crash for years and been laughed at for years, gave a speech. He said, "Sooner or later, a crash is coming, and it may be terrific." Finally, the market flinched. Prices dipped. Now, in a normal market, a dip is healthy. It's a correction. But remember buying on margin? Remember that $900 loan you took to buy $1,000 of stock? Here is the nightmare scenario. If the stock drops just 10%, your $100 equity is gone, wiped out. The broker doesn't wait for you to lose his money. He calls you. This is the margin call. He says, "Put more cash in your account right now, or I sell your stock." You don't have more cash. You spent it all. So the broker sells your stock to cover the loan. This selling drives the price down further, which triggers the margin call for the next guy. He has to sell. Price drops more. Next guy sells. Price drops more. It's a domino effect, a chain reaction of forced liquidation, and once it starts, gravity takes over. Throughout September and early October, the market was twitchy. It would drop, then rally. Drop, then rally. Bankers were nervous. They started quietly selling their own positions while telling the public everything was fine. Then came the week of October 21st. The air was thick with tension. You could feel it on the streets of Lower Manhattan. The ticker tape machines, those glass domes that printed out stock prices on paper ribbons, were running late. There was so much trading volume that the machines couldn't keep up. Imagine checking your phone for a stock price, but the data is from an hour ago. You don't know the real price. You are flying blind. Wednesday, October 23rd. The market drops sharply in the last hour of trading. A massive storm of sell orders hits the floor. The closing bell rings, saving the market from total collapse. But that night, nobody slept. Brokers stayed in their offices, chain smoking, loosening their ties, staring at piles of sell orders that had piled up for the next morning. Telegrams were flying across the country, sending margin calls to farmers in Iowa and shopkeepers in Texas. Send money or we sell. They didn't have the money. Thursday was coming. October 24th, 1929, Black Thursday. The bell rings at 10:00 a.m. Usually, the opening of the New York Stock Exchange is orderly. Not today. As soon as the gong sounds, a wave of sound hits the room. It's not a roar. It's a shriek. Sell, sell, sell at market. There were no buyers. That's the terrifying part. Everyone wanted out. Nobody wanted in. Stocks that opened at $100 were suddenly $90, then $80, then $60. Within minutes, fortunes that had taken a decade to build were evaporating. On the floor of the exchange, it was physical chaos. Men were shoving each other, tearing their collars open, sweating through their suits. The noise was so loud that traders couldn't hear the prices being shouted 3 feet away. Outside, on Wall Street, a crowd began to form. It wasn't a riot. It was a strange, silent vigil. Thousands of people gathered around the statue of George Washington across from the exchange. They just stared at the building. They knew their lives were being decided inside those walls. Rumors started flying through the crowd. 11 bankers have committed suicide. The exchange has been closed. None of it was true yet, but fear spreads faster than facts. By 12 o'clock p.m., the market is in free fall. It looks like the end of the American financial system. But the big players weren't dead yet. At noon, a group of the most powerful men in America met secretly at the offices of J.P. Morgan & Co., right across the street. These were the masters of the universe. Thomas Lamont from Morgan, Charles Mitchell from National City Bank, Albert Wiggin from Chase. They pooled their money together. They raised roughly $250 million. That's nearly $4 billion today. Their plan was simple. They would manipulate the market to save it. They would buy stocks at inflated prices to show confidence. It had worked in the panic of 1907. They thought it would work now. At 1:30 p.m., the doors of the stock exchange swung open. Richard Whitney, the vice president of the exchange, walked onto the floor. He was tall, aristocratic, confident. The room went silent. Whitney walked straight to the post for U.S. Steel. He asked for the price. The current bid was roughly $190. Whitney shouted, loudly enough for everyone to hear, "I buy 10,000 shares at $205. He was paying more than the asking price. The traders were stunned. Whitney then went to other posts, General Electric, AT&T buying massive blocks of stock. It was theater. It was a performance designed to say, the smart money is buying, you should too. And miraculously, it worked. The selling stopped. The prices stabilized. By the closing bell, the market had actually recovered most of its losses. The drop was only about 2%. That evening, the bankers patted themselves on the back. They drank their scotch. They told the press, the distress selling is over. The fundamentals are sound. They thought they had fixed it. They thought they were gods. But they forgot one thing. Friday was coming. And after Friday, the weekend. You see, on Black Thursday, only the people on the floor knew the true extent of the panic. But over the weekend, the newspapers hit the streets of Main Street America. The stories of chaos, the rumors of suicide, the sheer volume of selling. The psychological dam had cracked on Thursday. But on the following Tuesday, it would burst completely. The bankers had used a bucket of water to put out a forest fire, and the wind was picking up. The weekend of October 26th and 27th, 1929, was perhaps the longest weekend in American history. The stock exchange was closed. The ticker tape machines were silent. But the country was buzzing. The newspapers were out. The story of Black Thursday was now in every household in America. Remember, back then, information traveled slowly. On Thursday, the panic was mostly contained to New York. By Sunday, the panic had traveled by train and telegraph to Chicago, St. Louis, San Francisco, and small-town America. Regular people, the plumber with his life savings in RCA, the widow with her inheritance in General Electric sat at their kitchen tables. They did the math. They realized that the miracle recovery on Thursday afternoon was a Band-Aid on a bullet wound. They made a decision. A collective, terrified decision. On Monday morning, I'm getting out. I'm selling everything. I don't care about the price. Just get me out. Monday, October 28th. Black Monday. The market opens, and it's a bloodbath. The Dow drops nearly 13%. The bankers, the masters of the universe, who had saved the day on Thursday, met again. But this time, the mood was different. They looked at the sheer volume of sell orders piling up. They looked at their own shrinking portfolios, and they realized something terrifying. They didn't have enough money to stop this. The avalanche was too big, so they did what smart money always does when the ship is sinking. They didn't try to plug the hole. They ran for the lifeboats. They stopped supporting the market. Monday ended in ruin, but Monday was just the appetizer. Tuesday, October 29th, 1929. The most devastating day in the history of financial markets. The opening bell rang at 10 o'clock a.m., and the floor of the New York Stock Exchange turned into a madhouse. It wasn't just panic. It was capitulation. There were no buyers. None. Zero. Stocks were being offered for sale, and nobody was answering. Imagine you are a trader. You are holding a slip of paper to sell 1,000 shares of a company at $50. You shout $50. Silence. You shout $40. Silence. $30. Silence. $10. In moments, blue-chip stocks, the safest investments in America, became worthless paper. The ticker tape machine, the heartbeat of the market, fell behind. By noon, it was an hour late. By 2 o'clock p.m., it was 2 hours late. People across the country were selling stocks based on prices that were hours old. They thought they were selling at $50, but the real price was already $2. They were selling themselves into bankruptcy without even knowing it. The volume was unprecedented. 16.4 million shares were traded, a record that would stand for nearly 40 years. The sheer physical weight of the paper orders clogged the machines. William Crawford, the superintendent of the exchange, actually had to send workers onto the floor with large waste baskets to shovel up the discarded sell orders just so the traders could walk. They were literally wading knee-deep in broken dreams. At the end of the day, the market had lost $14 billion in value. In today's money, that is hundreds of billions, wiped out in 6 hours. The party was over, the lights were on, and the room was trashed. Now, let's go back to that image. The bodies raining from the sky, the ruined bankers jumping from windows. We have all seen the cartoons, the jokes. The hotel clerks asking guests, "Do you want a room for sleeping or for jumping?" It is a powerful story. It fits our sense of morality. The greedy were punished. They flew too close to the sun, and they fell. But here is the cold, hard data. It didn't happen. The chief medical examiner of New York City, Dr. Charles Norris, did a study on this. He looked at all the suicides in Manhattan from Black Thursday to the end of 1929. The number of suicides by jumping from buildings? 4. Just 4. And 2 of them were shopkeepers, not Wall Street bankers. In fact, the suicide rate in New York City during the weeks of the crash was actually lower than it had been during the summer of 1928, when the market was booming. So why does this myth exist? Why did Winston Churchill say he saw it? Why did the newspapers report it? Because the market crashed and everyone was sad is a boring headline. Wall Street rains bodies, sells papers. But the reality of what happened to these men is actually much sadder than jumping out a window. Most of them didn't kill themselves. They just faded away. They went home to their mansions that they could no longer afford. They fired their servants. They sold their cars. They quietly moved into small apartments. They lived the rest of their lives in shame, haunting the lobbies of buildings they used to own. The tragedy of 1929 wasn't sudden death. It was the slow, grinding death of pride. There were suicides, yes, but they weren't the dramatic public spectacles we imagine. J.J. Reardon, a prominent banker, went to his home, went into the bedroom, and used a pistol. He didn't want a scene. Jesse Livermore, the great bear who actually made $100 million shorting the crash, he survived 1929. But the depression that followed ate him up too. Years later, he would take his own life in a hotel cloakroom. The jumping myth allows us to distance ourselves. It makes the crash seem like a movie. The truth that people just lost everything and had to keep living is much more terrifying because it is much more real. If the story ended on Black Tuesday, it would be a tragedy. But it didn't end. It spread. The stock market crash was the trigger, not the bomb. The bomb was the economy itself. When the stock market evaporated, it took the banks with it. Banks had invested your deposits in the stock market. When the market crashed, your money was gone. This led to bank runs. You've seen the photos. Men in fedoras lining up around the block, pounding on the locked doors of their bank, begging for their life savings. But the vault was empty. 9,000 banks failed. Imagine that today. Imagine waking up tomorrow and Chase, Wells Fargo, and Bank of America simply don't exist. Your credit card doesn't work. Your ATM card is plastic trash. The crash on Wall Street became the Great Depression on Main Street. Unemployment hit 25%. 1 in 4 men could not find work. The Roaring Twenties became the Dirty 30s. The men who had been buying champagne in 1928 were standing in breadlines in 1932. It changed the psychology of America forever. My grandmother, who lived through this, used to wash and reuse aluminum foil. She never threw anything away. Why? Because the trauma of 1929 taught an entire generation that safety is an illusion. It took 25 years, until 1954, for the Dow Jones to reach the same level it was at in 1929. Think about that. If you bought at the top, you waited a quarter of a century just to break even. So, why are we talking about this today? Why does 1929 matter? Because human nature doesn't change. The technology changes. The algorithms change. The speed of trading changes. But the emotions, fear and greed, they are exactly the same. We saw it in the dot-com bubble of 2000. We saw it in the housing crisis of 2008. We see flashes of it in crypto and meme stocks. Every generation convinces itself that this time is different. We have better data now. We have the Federal Reserve. Stocks only go up. In 1929, Irving Fisher said stocks were on a permanently high plateau. He was a genius, and he was dead wrong. The story of 1929 isn't about numbers. It's a warning. It reminds us that the line between the best economy ever and total collapse is much thinner than we think. Wall Street didn't jump in 1929. It stumbled, it fell, and it dragged the world down with it. The question isn't, could it happen again? The question is, when? Thanks for listening. If you want to understand how the 2008 crisis was eerily similar to this one, click the video on your screen right now. I'll see you there.